Good morning. So this is one of those passages that I think, you might not know this, but the preachers, we actually draw straws for passages like this, and I lost. I got the short straw. Actually, that we don't do that. I think Pastor Allison just stuck me with this one on purpose. I've had this theory for a while that pastors like to do this. It's a weird passage, and I remember the first time that I actually read it. I think I was in college, or at least the first time I read it and thought about it, and I was like, nah, we'll just put that over there. You just kind of move on. You're just like, well, that one's probably wrong. That's all right. 99% is a pretty good streak for the Bible. Not too bad. I was like, heaven, but I can't be married. I was the type of kid, about when I was a junior in high school, I decided I was ready to be married. I wasn't. I was still an idiot. But I thought I was, and it had been my dream for a long time. And then when I read this passage, especially after finding my person in Becky, I was like, heaven without her? No, that can't be right. Now, I'll admit that as far as theology goes, the historical Christian concept of resurrection of the dead is not really a significant part of my personal theology and belief system. In fact, I recognize this is probably a privilege of my youth to a degree. It also is probably a privilege that I have as someone who has not had a lot of significant loss in my life to this point. But I understand, too, that this idea, this concept, this theology might be really important to many people. I think about All Saints' Day, which we celebrated just last week, and last year, and every year. But I think about celebrating that day and all the people that we've lost that mattered to us, and what it means to remember to them, what it means for them to still be alive in us. I think about people in here who have lost really close people, perhaps even a spouse, and have hopes of reuniting one day. The idea, the hope of resurrection can be really powerful for us. But when we get to this way that Jesus deals with it, and that the Sadducees bring it up, it makes me wonder, what's the actual good news in here for us? So I wanted to dive first a little bit into the context of this passage. Let's put some bookends on it. Jesus has entered into the city of Jerusalem at this point, and he has cleansed the temple, just the chapter previously, cleansed the temple, and now he's being confronted as he teaches by the religious leaders of Jerusalem. And this particular passage comes at the end of a stretch of interactions where Pharisees, Sadducees, other religious leaders try to trap Jesus. They try to trick him with their words in order to get him to commit a verbal crime, a theological crime, so that they can arrest him, so they can have the justification to eliminate him from the equation. Unfortunately, Jesus continues to stymie them at every turn. This is another one of those cases where Jesus bests them in their attempts to trap him. But what's really important about this story, too, actually comes at the end, right after we finish our lectionary passage, the next two verses. And those two verses say that the scribes respond to Jesus' answer, "Teacher, you have spoken well," for they no longer dare to ask him another question. They realized, after Jesus' answer to this, that they couldn't test him anymore. Their attempts to beat him with words, with their brains, were failing, so they realized that they would probably need to be taking more drastic measures in the days coming forward. This is the beginning of the end for Jesus, and we actually see just 2 chapters later, the plot to kill Jesus is hatched. So, what is it that Jesus said here in this strange little quiz about marriage of what is, I guess, the world's most unlucky wife? Or maybe we need to look into her a little bit more closely. I don't know. But something in this bizarre question, Jesus said in response that leads to, we might have to kill him. So what's going on here? It's worth noting that the Sadducees, it says they did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. Now, this is important. This is a distinct difference between the Sadducees and the Pharisees, by the way, in the Bible. They're united in their hatred of Jesus, but the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. The Pharisees did, and this is a really, really big point of contention between those two groups. The Sadducees believed only that the words of the Torah were authoritative. They call them the 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, and Numbers. They said those are the 5 authoritative books in Scripture, and if it wasn't in there, it wasn't the final law like everything else. And this Jewish theology of the resurrection of the dead actually comes around much later than those books. It comes around probably the 2nd century BCE. We see some really direct references in the apocryphal text of 2nd Maccabees, and then we also see in the book of Daniel, we see some references to it as well. Okay. The Sadducees, oh, hello. All right. So the Sadducees, in their question, they're trying to prove that the idea of the afterlife, of at least the resurrection, is ridiculous. And in doing so, they appeal to the logical fallacy that's known as appealing to the extremes. They seek to score a point here by using this interaction with Jesus to show the listening crowd how absurd the concept of the resurrection was, because it could not possibly coexist with their marriage customs. The marriage law that they reference comes from Deuteronomy, and it was actually in its day a really, really helpful law. It was designed to protect not only the name and the lineage of the deceased husband, but it was also there to provide care and protection for the widow and the children who are left behind. But in his response, instead of them making Jesus look foolish or the idea of the resurrection look foolish, Jesus flips it, and he makes them look foolish instead for asking such a ludicrous question. The first thing he does is he shows them as being nearsighted. He says those who belong to this age are married and given in marriage, but not those in the age of the resurrection. He says that what they're trying to think about the end of the age with the resurrection talk, but the Sadducees are stuck in the past. They're unable to look forward because they're stuck back there with the way things are, things were, they think they should have been. So the conversation that's going on here isn't actually about marriage, it's about how far the Sadducees were, from understanding what the resurrection was actually about. He says, you wonder if resurrected people can be married. I'm saying resurrected people can't even die. You're so far off from the scope and scale of what's going on here. This is much bigger than you can even think about right now because you're stuck on these little details. They couldn't have been further from the point. What they wanted was the resurrection to come to them on their terms. They wanted it to be under their rules and subject to their authority. These were the religious leaders. They made the rules. They ran the temple. But Jesus says the resurrected life is not subject to your authority. It's not even subject to the authority of death. And then to really make his point, Jesus appeals to the story of Moses, the father of their holy texts. He says, if Moses is right when he said that God was still the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob, and yes, if you think God is still the God of Moses, how can they be dead? Because God is the God of the living. This would have been a humiliating defeat for the Sadducees. Not only was the table turned on them and they were made to look foolish in front of Jesus and the crowd watching, but their authority and their knowledge of the law had been completely undermined. This was everything that gave them their power. So they realized that they couldn't defeat Jesus with their words and that they would need to probably take more drastic and even violent actions. But understanding the story even further means realizing that Bible stories don't just occur within the context of the stories themselves, they also occur within the history that the story is written and sent out to. It's authored for specific people. For example, Luke's gospel, in the form that we possess, comes about in the decades following the Jewish revolt, probably the last couple decades of the first century. And this was when the Roman military completely crushed a Jewish rebellion and as a result completely destroyed the city of Jerusalem and demolished the temple. This was not just a loss of land of a holy city, but there were a massive, massive number of casualties. Hundreds of thousands, some people say up to 1 million. It probably wasn't 1 million, but it's a huge, huge defeat with many Jewish lives lost as part of this. And on the other side of it, Rome is still there. and Rome is still in control, and it feels like Rome will always still be in control at this point, maybe more than ever. So the question about the resurrection to them, to those readers on the other side who remember that happening, who probably lost somebody in the revolt and in the battle, the question about the resurrection is about two things: hope and justice. These late first century Jews needed to know, why would they hope in a world that seems like it will always be dominated by the Romans? But the resurrection offers that hope, both for them and for the loved ones that they had lost. This search for hope in the midst of the resurrection actually reminds me of like the spirituals that were sung in America in the time of slavery. The one that came to my mind as I was writing the sermon was "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." The second verse of that song says, "If you get back to heaven before I do, you'll tell all your friends I'll be coming there too." There's this hope in there being a place where there's a greater power, a place where something else wins, and a place where those who you've lost, you'll be reunited with them. It's a hope that keeps people going through extreme oppression, through hardship, through suffering. Because these people, going back to these first century Jews, they also needed to know, had their God been defeated? Was Rome too big? Was it too powerful for their God to free them? The story of the resurrection, embodied in the resurrection of Jesus, which comes just a couple chapters after this story, shows them that no power on earth, not even the power of the grave, can permanently stop God's moving in the world. In other words, the resurrection says Rome doesn't get the last word. Now for us, 2,000 years later, what does the resurrection mean for us? See, we're lucky. We no longer live in the days of empirical superpowers like Rome. Right? 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 We have lessons to learn from this too. We can learn a lesson from the Sadducees because we too can be nearsighted. We can get stuck in our ways and miss the point. We can get so focused on the rules and our paradigms of the world as we see them that we can't see the bigger picture, that we miss the forest for the trees. And we can fight it all we want. In fact, it's probably our nature to fight it. But the world continues to open up to us in new ways that offer the chance to move forward. We see this happening throughout history. We see it in our families. We see it in our communities, in our nation. We see it happen from generation to generation. The world continues to open up, offer new, gracious, exciting ways to experience life, to love one another. The God of the living is the reason that this happens. The God of the living is with us today, continuing to move within us and to call us forward. So, like the Sadducees, we too should resist the urge to get stuck and think that we are right and think that we are finished, because we're probably not. As we talked about in our children's sermon, heaven's not all the way here just yet. And we today also need hope and justice. If we're totally honest, most of us in this room probably don't truly know what it feels like to be on the wrong side of the empire's boot. We are, though, living in a time where the poor and the marginalized are suffering. Their rights are being attacked in the courts, people are being kidnapped in the streets, and the money to feed the hungry is being withheld so that politicians can score points. We need the hope of the resurrection so that we can believe this is not the ultimate way of the world, that emperors and oligarchs will not have the final say, and that we can do something about it. We can't act without hope. We need the hope of the resurrection to know that there will be justice, justice for those who are suffering now, and justice for those whose suffering does not come to an end during their time on earth. Finally, the resurrection also connects us to our spiritual ancestors, the God of Abraham and Moses and Isaac and Jacob. It connects us to those who came before us and who shaped the world into what it is today. These ancestors continue to live in and through us, and we hope that their spirits will continue to be alive in the future. And in remembering them, as we did on All Saints' Day, we're invited to join them. We're invited to see the resurrected life in the world around us and to participate in creating more of it. So when we go out from this place today, may we all be people of the resurrection, for today, for tomorrow, and forever. Amen.